From Mark Carney cruising to victory and the transition ahead to Albertans hearing from a rural MLA voted out of the UCP caucus. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, Jim Groom, a political scientist, recently retired from Medicine Hat College, and John Brennan is a political analyst and commentator. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with reaction to a change in leadership.
Liberal establishment has installed Justin Trudeau's economic advisor as the next Liberal leader to trick Canadians into giving Liberals a fourth term in power. But he's just like Justin, and he's more of the same.
The leader of the federal Conservatives responding to Liberal Party members handing Mark Carney a landslide victory in their party's leadership race over the weekend. The Prime Minister-designate has already made his way to Parliament Hill, meeting with the old leadership and his new team. Jim, I'll start with you. Why do you think Mark Carney finished with such a landslide and surprised Chrystia Freeland didn't have more of an impact?
Yes, I thought she actually would have been doing a little better than she did. But, you know, I think they really want to send a message that they're a united party. They are all behind Mark Carney, and they have no doubts about their position in the future. They see him as a stable presentation, a stable presence for their party. And I think they all got it behind him that way, which really shows a unified approach. And, you know, as we've been talking, we need a unified approach to combat King Donald, and so this is what they need, and it seems like they've all bought into it.
John, how much momentum do you see Mark Carney being able to carry out of the Liberal leadership race?
Well, he's certainly got a lot of momentum right now, Michael. It's been extraordinary, their turnaround in the polling in the last 2 months. You know, Nick Nanos was out with his latest polling data this morning for CTV, showing that the Conservatives now are down to a 1-point lead, 37 points to 36 points nationally. This, you know, a 26-point lead evaporated in 60 days. Unheard of, Michael. It's unbelievable, really, in polling history in Canada. So Mark Carney and the federal Liberals have momentum right now, and that's why I think we're going to go into a federal election sooner rather than later, because they're going to want to use this momentum going into an election campaign.
Jim, on that point, Mark Carney vowing a quick and seamless transition to taking control of government, but how quickly do you see him moving to an election?
I think he will go right away as well. You know, John says the momentum is with him right now. The public has been interested in it. The polls are favorable. They want to beat the Conservatives to the punch before they spend a lot more money on advertising, because once the red is dropped, all the rules change as far as funding is concerned. And so it'll be a more of an even playing field, because the Conservatives are a money machine. They are a real juggernaut when it comes to collecting cash from their supporters. So I think he'll go as soon as he possibly can.
Johnny's never campaigned as a politician. Based on what you've seen so far, including his victory speech on Sunday, how much is Mark Carney going to have to up his game if the Liberals are to face down momentum built up by the Conservatives over the past year?
He's going to really have to up his game, Michael. I thought his victory speech on Sunday afternoon was rather flat, you know, especially coming after Jean Chrétien's great speech. So he's going to have to up his game. He's going to have to learn how to give better speeches. He's going to have to really learn how to glad hand when he goes into crowds. So, you know, and he's up against somebody who's a career politician. You know, Pierre Poilievre's been in this game for 20 years. He's a master at communicating. He's a very good public speaker. He's very good at big rallies and glad handing. So, you know, this is going to be a big test for Mark Carney, you know, the technocrat going up against somebody who's a seasoned campaigner and a very good politician.
Jim, the tariff situation escalated again today, as we discussed with Sabrina Grover off the top. The White House reacting to Ontario's Doug Ford imposing a surcharge on electricity, potentially doubling tariffs on steel and aluminum. How do you see Mark Carney playing into the trade war dynamic?
Well, I think Sabrina was right. He's going to have to consolidate his team with the premiers and have a united front. And then he's going to be the point person for the discussions. Now, he can use his ministers, as mentioned, because they do have experience. But I think he'll try to be the stable influence in behind the scenes. greasing the skids with the premiers is going to be a crucial part, because they are at the pointy end of the stick, and they're the ones that are going to take it on the chin. So he has to deal with that issue first and foremost, I think.
John, what are you looking for in how Mark Carney plays with the premiers, especially where Alberta is concerned and the shipment of Alberta oil south of the border?
Mm-hmm. Well, as Jim said, it's very important the way he's going to deal with the premiers. And I expect him to be sworn in, Michael, in the next couple of days. And then what I would expect that he would have a Zoom call with all the premiers, much like current Prime Minister Trudeau has been doing for weeks now because of this tariff war with the United States. So he's going to want to connect with the premiers as a whole, and he's probably going to want to talk to some of them individually, especially since Doug Ford is in the midst of this dispute with the United States over his putting a surcharge on electricity. And then we saw Donald Trump's response today. So it's very important that he have a good relationship with the premiers and that they're all on the same side. With regards to Alberta and Alberta oil, really, Michael, I think that's going to be a last resort because, I agree with Danielle Smith in this regard that I think it would be a mistake to put an export tax on oil and natural gas exports. It's a huge revenue generator for the country, and also would be shooting ourselves in the foot because some of our oil makes it through Line 5 up to Ontario and Quebec. So we'd be putting an export tax on oil that eventually comes back into Eastern Canada. So I don't think that's going to happen, certainly not in the short term. But I do expect Mark Carney to get in touch with the premiers and to work with them closely.
And Jim, where Justin Trudeau is concerned, once the transition takes place, what kind of a role do you see Trudeau actually having as former PM moving forward?
Well, if any, it would be behind the scenes because Carney wants to set up establish his own credentials, his credibility, and unfortunately, the Conservatives were really, really quite good at targeting Trudeau, and they've discredited him over the last number of years. He's also injured himself because of his missteps along the line. So I think he can go into a nice quiet retirement, maybe in Chicoutimi, Quebec, along with the other former prime ministers or something of that nature.
All right. Okay, time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, discontent gets a rural MLA booted out of the UCP caucus. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. An Alberta MLA has been kicked out of the UCP caucus as a consequence of challenging the government's budget and suggesting he would vote against it.
I just felt like my voice wasn't being heard. My one highway that people are dying on, because that's a need, not a want. I'm not looking for pickleball courts and wave pools.
Scott Sinclair aired his dissatisfaction with the provincial budget on social media, calling it at best disappointing and at worst unacceptable. The UCP's chief government whip announced Sinclair's caucus removal in a statement writing, all government MLAs are expected to vote in favor of a tabled budget. John, what do you make of the stand Scott Sinclair has taken? He says he doesn't regret the decision and he has the support of constituents.
Well, on this question, Michael, I agree with the chief government whip. It is fine for backbench MLA to raise concerns, especially issues in their riding. The way to do it is within caucus and to make the points to the premier and the ministers within caucus. Because if you signal that you're going to vote against the budget, that's a vote of non-confidence. In our British Westminster parliamentary system of government, you can't have government members voting against the government on confidence matters, and that's like speech from the throne and on budgets. And so, in this one, I think Scott Sinclair, being a rookie MLA, he got really upset with the budget and he went public with a post on Facebook. Cooler head should have prevailed and he should have backed down on this one, because it's fine to raise those concerns and fine even to raise them publicly, but you can't vote against the budget because that's a vote of non-confidence in the government.
With that in mind, Jim, what though does the response of the UCP caucus signal to you? Or maybe are you surprised that they moved as quickly as they did to create the exit?
When it's a crucial issue like the budget, they really do have to make their position well known. This was one of the faults of Jason Kennedy in the last in his government, where he had some rebels sort of thing in his caucus, and he didn't get to it fast enough, and it sort of festered, and it started to spread on him. And then when he did finally act and take movement on it, it seemed kind of overbearing and extreme. So, you know, we elect these folks, and they think they have quite an important position, and they do. But then they realize that they're taking orders from the chief of staff or from the party whip, and they feel a little chagrin about it, and they don't feel consulted, which is the role of the leader, to kind of make them embrace them a little bit more and make them feel that way, so they don't find it necessary to rebel.
John, Scott Sinclair, not the only one on the outs. Peter Guthrie put on probation after quitting as a cabinet minister over handling of the HS interference allegations. How big of a bump in the road is this where unity within the UCP is concerned?
Well, both of these incidents show that there are fractures in UCP unity. But, you know, the Peter Guthrie case is a little different. Here, he's following the norm. And that is, if you're a cabinet minister and you disagree with something that's happening in your government, and for Peter Guthrie, it was the issues with regards to Alberta Health Services and their contracting with the private surgical clinics. You know, he stepped down as a matter of principle. He said that he couldn't agree with what was going on in the government with regards to these contracts. And so as a result, he was going to resign his minister's job and just sit as an MLA in the caucus. And, you know, that's the way our system is supposed to work. If you don't agree with the government, resign from cabinet and sit as a backbencher. So in Peter Guthrie's case, he's not threatening to vote against the budget or, you know, a speech from the throne, which are confidence matters. So it's a little different than the Scott Sinclair case.
Jim, is there a likely return, though, to the UCP fold for either?
Yes, I think they both have doors are left open. No one wants to punish people on an extended period of time. It just gets worse if that's the case, and they look for allies, and the next thing you know, you have 3 or 4, 5 people who are jumping ship, and nobody wants that to happen. So Guthrie's a difficult one because he has sort of said to cabinet, I tried to bring this forward, you wouldn't listen to me, and now my resignation is all I have left to do. Now, if he turns out that there's all kinds of inside information that he was privy to, it's going to impact on the AHS scandal that we're looking at. That could have a real effect, of course, down the road, and that may mean that he would be barred. But it will also have enormous changes within the government itself.
Okay, we have time for one more topic. Plans for the Premier to participate in an event in Florida later this month coming under fire.
So Danielle Smith loves nothing more than hanging out with right-wing extremists in the United States. It's where she gets her policy ideas. It's where she gets her talking points.
Alberta taxpayers are picking up the tab for the Premier to share the stage with American conservative political commentator Ben Shapiro at a gala in South Florida, raising funds for a non-profit group that claims to promote American values. Jim, what do you make of the Premier being set to appear alongside a controversial podcaster who in the past has posted on social media in favor of the U.S. annexing Canada? A defensible use of taxpayer dollars?
No, I think it gives a certain amount of credibility to these extreme groups that I know the Premier has a liking for these groups and has a philosophical link to them. But I think to go down and give them credibility by speaking to their groups is not fruitful. It's also the whole aspect that she is expecting to have an audience that's going to be receptive is kind of ironic because the group she's talking to are the MAGA Republicans, and they are going to support Trump. And no matter what she says, there's not going to be any sea change in the public impressions in the United States.
John, in terms of being an opportunity to get Alberta's message out, to get the Canadian message out, is this on the same level as say, meeting with Republican politicians or speaking at the huge energy conference currently underway in Texas this week? Where do you weigh in here?
Yeah, no, it's not, Michael. You know, I don't have a problem with Danielle Smith going on various conservative, alt-right media outlets in the United States to try to make Alberta's case and Canada's case in this tariff war. But it seems to me that's a long way to go from Calgary down to Florida just for one event to take part in this fireside chat with Ben Shapiro to try to get your message across. You know, that's a huge expense for a one-off event. You know, just last weekend, she did a radio interview with Breitbart, and I'm sure she's done interviews with other right-wing conservative media outlets as well. I have no problem with that because you're talking to people who are Trump supporters and you're trying to make the case that what Trump is doing with this tariff war is bad for America. But, you know, in this particular case, Michael, like flying all the way down to Florida just to take part in this fireside chat with Ben Shapiro as a one-off event, it seems to me that's a major expense, and it's certainly, you know, to answer your question, it's certainly not the same as meeting with Republican politicians in Washington or at the energy conference she's attending right now in Houston.
All right, gentlemen. Well, we'll have to leave it there for time. Good to see you both. Thank you kindly for this.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, John.